أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. روي عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله زوجوا أياماكم فإن الله يحسن في أخلاقهم ويوسع لهم في أرزاقهم ويزيدهم في مرواتهم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Felicitations, Ya al-Zahraa, on this adored day. Your Zahra has adorned the cloak of marriage today. Felicitations, Ya al-Zahraa, on this adored day. Your Zahra has adorned the cloak of marriage today. The leader of all the men has married the chief of the women, the reflection of heaven. The groom is from Allah's house, Zahra, the luminous, his chosen spouse. Felicitations, Ya al-Zahraa, on this adored day. Your Zahra has adorned the cloak of marriage today. Tears of joy are seen in Muhammad's eyes. Tears of joy are seen in Muhammad's eyes, looking above to the heaven and skies. Silently whispering, with God he spoke. His heart felt light, for his Kauthar now glowed. Congratulations to everyone on the anniversary of the marriage of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, and Lady Fatima Zahra, salamullahi alayha, the leader of the women of the worlds. And on this day, I would like to begin with a narration from the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa alih, which I was just mentioning previously, in which it is related that he advised people, unite in marriage those people who are single among you, help people to get married, because if they do marry, then Allah Ta'ala will improve through marriage. Allah will improve and refine their akhlaq and their character, and He will increase their sustenance, and He will increase them in their sense of manliness and chivalrousness. So mashallah, many blessings of marriage listed there. The increase in sustenance from Allah Ta'ala, inshallah, people developing good character through marriage, but also this latter quality, which is also very important, this characteristic of manliness or chivalrousness. There are many ideas that we have about what it means to be an ideal man or an ideal woman. Most of us grow up from an early age with a picture in our minds of what the ideal man or the ideal woman is. It may not be something we think about a lot in our lives. It may not be something we've actually sat and tried to write down or to put into words, but we do have these ideas about what is a true man and what is a true woman. Does Islam have anything to say about this? Does Islam tell us what is a true man or a true woman? And indeed, there are many examples in the Islamic heritage of what indeed constitutes an ideal man and an ideal woman, which of course is a subject very important when we get to family life and marriage. Now, with respect to what makes an ideal woman, we have so many lectures on women in Islam that I do not want to repeat what everyone has already heard. However, I would like to look at the lesser discussed subject of what makes an ideal man in the Islamic tradition. What are the true traits of Islamic manhood, especially as demonstrated by Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Because he, alayhi salam, he is one of those people who really is considered a paradigm for what it means to be a true and a real man in the Islamic tradition. This is not limited to the Shia or the school of Ahl al-Bayt. There is a general consensus that when we look at his life from his younger years to his older years, we do see this wonderful example of what it is to be a man. Now, this is not to say we don't see it in the example of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. Obviously we do. We see it in the lives of the later Imams as well. However, I suppose what is particularly unique about the position of the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, is that we see a historical record of how he served Islam from a very young age beneath the wing of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, all the way up to the latter part of his life, where he held a formal political position. So we see all of this encapsulated under the wing of Islam and under the banner of Islamic history. So perhaps this is one of the reasons we do celebrate this quality of his when we say, La fata illa Ali, la sayf illa dhul faqar. And so let us consider this question of what sort of ideals for men the commander of the faithful, alayhi salam, presents, particularly, but not exclusively, with respect to his family life. Now, if we stop and ask the question, what are some important characteristics for men, just off the top of our head, probably many people would come up with characteristics like strength and like courage, right? When we think of true men, we don't think of wimps, we don't think of weaklings. We think of people who are very valorous, very valiant, who are not going to run away from battle. Was Imam Ali, alayhi salam, was he valorous and valiant, and was he a brave and strong and indomitable warrior? Yes, of course he was. This is one of the many things that we frequently celebrate about his life, right? The accounts of his service to Islam in defending the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and defending the community. So no one can say that he was not strong. No one can say that he was not brave. And we do find this trait is continued throughout the family of the Prophet alayhi salam. Not only among the Ma'sumin, but even among others. So for example, when we look at the account on the day of Ashura, we find, for example, Hazrat Ali al-Akbar, very strong, very brave warrior. Even Hazrat Qasim, peace be upon him, despite his age, still he had no fear of the enemy. He still was a force to be reckoned with. So we do see this basic characteristic of physical strength as well as courage passing throughout the line of the family of the Prophet, alayhimus salam. And of course, it's not a characteristic that is exclusive to males, although we are talking about males here. There are plenty of women who are strong and are courageous. Even when we look within the household of the Prophet, alayhimus salam, Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her, she did many things that were very courageous in her life. Hazrat Zainab, standing up against the tyrant of her era, that definitely requires courage. Or even again, outside of the household of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. Nusayba, for example, very highly praised by the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, for her military defense of him and of Islam. So this is not a characteristic exclusive to males. However, it's something we think about oftentimes when it comes to males. So there's no doubt that Imam Ali, peace be upon him, was strong and was brave. However, the issue is not whether or not he was strong or whether or not he was brave, but rather the issue is how he used that strength. What did he use it for? Did he use it to lord over people? Did he use it to oppress people? Did he use it to get his way or for his personal advantage? Of course not. Instead, we find in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, a revolution in the idea of strength and courage, what it means to be a strong and brave and valiant warrior. Because these were characteristics also prized in the time of Jahiliyyah, right? The pre-Islamic Arabs used to go into battle just to prove themselves and to get a name. So it's not as if these characteristics were unimportant. But we know that the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, for example, he saw people lifting a very heavy rock. They're trying to see who is the strongest one among them. He says to them, should I tell you who is the strongest person? It's not the person who can lift the heaviest rock or who can lift this rock, but rather it is the person who does not do something wrong when they are happy, who does not speak anything but the truth when they are angry, and does not do what is unjust when they are in power, right? So when they have the temptation, they have power, they can do whatever they want. they do not do anything that would be disobedient to Allah or displeasing to Allah Ta'ala. That this is true strength. And similarly, it's related from the commander of the faithful, alayhi salam, that the strongest person is the one who has the most strength over their own self. They can control their own self the most. This was the new value of strength that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, the prophetic message as explained by Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, this was the revolution in this value that they brought. Incidentally, just as a side note, we don't always necessarily see this all the time with some of the other companions. Some of them, unfortunately, they did continue this trend of violence. For example, Khalid ibn al-Walid, who by some Muslims is praised as the sword of Allah, which I suppose sword is a bit of an apt name. We do know that unfortunately he did apply force and violence to many people, killing some people unjustly. And it did fall to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam to try to make amends, to try to soften their hearts. Of course, you can't make up for killing people, but to try, because the sunnah of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam was not to approach people through force, but rather through tolerance and reaching out to people. So this was the sense of strength among Ahlul Bayt, especially Imam Ali alayhi salam. However, when he came to the door of his house, did he bring his strength into the house and use it on his wife and his children? Did he come into the house and say, yes, I am a strong man and I am going to show my domination over the family by my muscles? Of course, we know that he did not. And just as some people, when they go home, they might take off a jacket, maybe a scholar might take off an abba, they take off socks, whatever people take off, he would take off his strength and leave it at the door. And in his family life would become very humble because he was so strong and such a powerful warrior that he did not need to exert his strength on his family, on his wife, on his children, on anyone else. Instead, he was able to be humble before them. This is incidentally also a good piece of advice for women too. I do not mean to fully limit this to men. There are some women who also approach their families through violence, perhaps because they don't know any other way to do it, especially with the children. However, this does create an environment of animosity, and the example of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam was instead to treat people with kindness and to try to handle people in a different way, not through force or violence or even yelling and so forth. For example, we see the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, when he had domestic disputes. There were domestic disputes in his household. Obviously, he had many wives. Not everyone was getting along or doing the right thing all the time. Would he lift a hand to his wives? Would he hit his wives? We do not see that, not from the Holy Prophet, not from any of the Imams. Instead, he would just separate himself from them until it was clear that he was unhappy and the situation was resolved. Similarly, it's related from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, that I am very astonished at the man who would hit his wife. Whereas, in fact, in this situation, he's the one who really deserves to be hit. And of course, one of the very beautiful things about the marriage of Imam Ali and Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon them, is that not only did they have complete, of course, absence of force or violence, but even arguing. It is not related that they argued with each other or they were displeased with each other. Instead, as Imam Ali alayhi salam says, that I was always happy with her, or I was never angry with her, and she was never angry with me. That they did not have to have this kind of conflict. Now, some people might say, well, that is all well and good, but my wife is not Hazrat Fatima. My husband is not Imam Ali. So what about my situation? Did all of the Imams have wives like Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her? We know that some of the Imams had some very difficult wives. Having your wife poison you is difficult. You can't really get much worse than your wife poisoning you to death. And yet, they still showed patience and good behavior with the family. And this is something also related from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alayhi, It's related, for example, that if a man has a difficult wife and he is patient with her, that he just tries to be patient with her, that Allah Ta'ala will grant him the reward of Nabi Ayub alayhi salam, a prophet who is known for his patience. And similarly, if a wife has a husband who is very difficult, which does happen, if she is patient, Allah Ta'ala will grant her the reward of Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun. And really, you don't get a worse husband than Fir'aun. You know, he was really among the worst husbands in the history of humanity. So the point is, we are encouraged to try to be patient and understanding rather than to go into conflict. Another area where sometimes force comes up in the family is with respect to children. Some people from an early age use physical force to try to train or discipline their children. And this is not recommended in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And one of the things that results when you use a lot of force on a young person is that after a while they become desensitized to it. And after a while, nothing else will work. If you don't accustom them to being hit, then you can use other forms of discipline. But if from the beginning you only hit them or cause some sort of pain to them, then you're not going to be able to go back and use those other forms of discipline because they, by that time, have become used to that. And as we know, it does tend to make a cycle of violence. Children who grow up with a lot of violence in the family will then treat their own families in that way as well. It's said that using or hitting a child is like pouring, with apologies, manure on a young crop. The idea being you have this nice baby tomato plant or cucumber plant or whatever kind of plant you have. If you start pouring manure on it, it's going to smother the poor plant, right? It's not going to be able to hold it. And these young children, they are innocent. Yes, they do things that are frustrating and annoying and they cry and so forth. However, they are trying to grow in their own way. They're not trying to harm anyone. And so insofar as it is possible, it is generally recommended from the Imams, peace be upon them, not to hit children. For example, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he advised a man not to hit his child who was being difficult, but instead just separate yourself from him for a while. Even not a long time, because that can be traumatic for children to be separated from their parents, but just separate yourself from him for a while so he understands that you're angry. You don't need to go to hitting him. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it is haram for someone to hit their child. There may be cases where it is the better option. For example, if the child is young and they're doing something that endangers themselves, maybe they're trying to run into the highway, for example. I knew a person who sometimes used to hit his child because his son had to wear glasses to keep from going blind, and the young boy kept taking off his glasses and losing them, and his father was worried he was going to go blind. So this is the way he emphasized to him that you need to wear your glasses. But the point being, these things should be considered, and they should not be out of anger. It's not just, I am angry, so I want to take out my anger on this child, right? I mean, when we look at Imam Ali alayhi salam, did he do things out of anger? You know, even on the battlefield, did he fight out of anger? We all know the story of the battle of Khandaq. Why is it that the strike of Ali alayhi salam on the day of Khandaq is like all of the worship of the Thaqalain? ضربة علي يوم الخندق أفضل من عبادة الثقلين. It's better than the worship of the Thaqalain. It is among the reasons, of course, among the many reasons, we know that this is one battle where he stopped and fought only for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And the moment he felt that he was fighting because he was angered because his enemy, but his enemy spat in his face, then he stopped and he took a break and he paused and said, wait a minute, let me make sure my intention is correct. I am not fighting this man because I'm angry. Rather, I'm doing something for the right reason because Allah Ta'ala has commanded this. And so this is the example we should have too. If we do ever need to use force in our lives, whether it's with children or maybe some situation on the street or so forth, these things should not be out of anger. Instead, it should be only because it is the right decision. So we see with respect to these values of strength and courage that on the one hand, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he is the true example of what it means to be a man. He is truly the strongest, truly the bravest, truly the most valorous. However, when it comes to his family life, he does not impose these characteristics on his family, but instead he becomes humble. And even it's related from him alayhi salam that when you are teaching your children, you should bring yourself down to your level. You need to become a bit like a child. Because after all, the children cannot come up to our level. They don't have the intellectual capacity. They're not developmentally ready for that. So sometimes we need to put ourselves in the shoes of children to be able to understand them and talk to them. So this is one characteristic. Another characteristic of a true man, as exemplified in the life of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, is that a true man will try to provide for his family, right? He will do whatever he needs to try to take care of the practical and financial needs of his family. Now, I am intentionally saying try because I understand there are some people, some men, that is to say, who cannot. After all, rizq is from Allah. Allah Ta'ala, He puts us in different situations. There are people who, through no fault of their own, they cannot care for their wife or their children. However, the important thing is that people try. Did the commander of the faithful, alayhi salam, did he try to take care of his family? He went through so much effort to take care of his family. He did so much work. He did harder work than many of us do to fulfill this responsibility. And of course, this goes without saying that this responsibility is also there if someone has children, but perhaps there's a separation. This happens in real life, obviously. But still, a man's children are his children, and he has the responsibility to provide for them and be part of their lives, insofar as it is possible. It's also related that Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he became aware of men in the society who were not fulfilling this responsibility, because it happened even back then, some men were not responsible to their families financially, that he would actually go to them and push them to provide for their families and their dependents, because this was something that was so important. And he himself would make it known that he was doing this. So for example, even when he had the formal position of Khalifa, of course we believe he is the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi anyway, but even when he formally had the position of Khalifa, he would go out to the market, buy what his family needed, and carry it back himself. And some people would say, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, what is this? Why don't you get someone to carry this for you? And he would say, no, it is best that when a man is bringing something to his family, that he carry it through his own efforts, that he himself put forth this effort. MashaAllah, very beautiful example. Keeping in mind the encouragement to give to one's family is not limited just to the basics, the basic providing, but also people are encouraged to give to their families. For example, when someone goes on a trip, it is recommended to bring gifts to their families. When the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he advised people that if you go to the market and you buy gifts for the family, so again, maybe not requirements, but gifts, that this is like a form of charity. And he added that you should give to the female members of the family first, maybe because of the difficult position of women during the time of Jahiliyyah. Allahu A'lam. And this is also related from the fourth Imam, peace be upon him, that Allah is most pleased with the person who is most pleased or most generous with their dependents. That this is a characteristic, giving to one's family, that pleases Allah Ta'ala. But is giving only material? Is it only material wealth that we give? And the answer is no. Maybe someone can't necessarily give a lot of extra material things to their family. So what are some other things that people can give to their family? It is related from the Holy Prophet ﷺ that among the rights a wife has over her husband is that he does not frown at her. So he doesn't sit in the household and frown all the time. Instead, he has a pleasant expression. He doesn't make her wonder what is wrong. In fact, there are so many narrations about the importance of smiling. For example, smiling in front of one's brethren in faith is a form of sadaqah. And there's a remarkable story that I did hear once. I once heard of a man who had a bit of a difficult family life. He himself always had a very dour, very serious expression. He felt this is what a man should be. He should be very unhappy looking in front of his family. So someone became aware of this and they challenged him. They said, just for 40 days, say, I want you every day to smile at home. So does this cost anything for him to smile? It does not. So he agreed to give it a try. So he wakes up the next day, he goes for breakfast, he sees his wife, he gets a big smile on his face. His wife was shocked. She thought maybe her husband was ill because she'd never seen this from him before. You know, has something happened to you? And he said, no, nothing's wrong. I'm not ill, I'm not hallucinating or anything, but this is how I have decided to be. I am going to be a happy person in the household, inshallah. And so, day after day, the environment inside their household began to change. Because smiling is one of those things that it's infectious for one thing. It has an effect on others. You smile and they smile and soon everyone is happy. Also, it affects ourselves, right? If we are looking very serious or very unhappy, we tend to feel very unhappy. When we look happy, that also affects our inside as well. And soon before long, there was a revolution in this man's family life, just through this simple piece of advice, which is, in particular, a man should smile in front of his family. Of course, this is also good advice for women too. Definitely it works for both. And of course, we should not forget that when it comes to Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salam, their efforts to take care of their family, whether it's financially, whether it's emotionally, whether it's practically, were not, of course, limited to their family, but rather they saw humanity as their family. As the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, Ana wa Ali abawa hadhihi al-ummah, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is like our own father. So we know that he would go through any sort of effort to take care of people who were in need. And so this is another very important characteristic of Imam Ali alayhi salam that he shows us with respect to the example of men, especially in the family. There's another characteristic that perhaps we don't always talk about a lot as an actual family value, and that is something that the Holy Prophet ﷺ is said to have described as a characteristic of Islam itself. It's related that he said that every religion has a characteristic, and the characteristic of Islam is modesty. That is to say, modesty is actually an intrinsic characteristic of Islam and Islamic faith. We do talk about this quite a bit for women, but also, of course, it is important for everyone, and it can be a very elevating value when it is shared and reinforced among the family. Of course, modesty itself is a virtue which has many facets. The part we usually talk about most is modesty in front of the other gender, so not saying or doing or wearing inappropriate things. But there are, of course, higher levels, such as modesty before Allah Ta'ala, or it's recommended that we have some modesty before the angels who are forced to accompany us all the time, and we don't want to make them unhappy or embarrassed. Or even it's related from Imam Ali alayhi salam himself, that the height of modesty is to have modesty in front of one's own self. So it's not just about other people, but even oneself. And that this is indeed a deep virtue that the believer should have. And we see this throughout the lives of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salam. It was indeed a family value, both for the men and for the women. When it comes to Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her, we are aware of this. Even the men. For example, it's related from one of the Imams, peace be upon them, that, God forbid, no one ever saw any of us in our lifetimes clad in an inappropriate fashion. That is to say, our physical modesty was maintained all the time because of this spiritual status that they had. And there are accounts of them always maintaining an attitude of modesty in situations where other people might not necessarily have done the same. So this is a very important characteristic of Islam. We do see it definitely in the life of Imam Ali and Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon them. Even when Imam Ali, alayhi salam, when he comes to ask for the hand of Hazrat Fatima, right, he's a little bit shy. He doesn't just rush in and say, Ya Rasulullah, can I marry your daughter? You know, he's a bit hesitant. This is a nice trait. People like this trait. And one of the things to consider is that it's also something which is very helpful and very healthy in a spousal relationship. That is to say, for example, the reality is that people in general will appreciate a woman's beauty more if she is covered, because her appearance is not something which is available, and we tend to appreciate the things that are rare and hidden. This is just human psychology. So this aspect of modesty, that is to say the hijab, does have a positive impact on the family life. Similarly, women also do appreciate this value from men as well. We do like it when men are obeying the commandment of Allah Ta'ala that they should lower their gaze and really embody this virtue. And inshallah, it can be the foundation of a very good family life. That being said, this modesty should not prevent people from one thing which is highly recommended also for males in the narrations, and that is it is recommended from Imam Ali alayhi salam that men should look nice for their wives. He used to go to men in the community, actually, it's related, he used to go to men in the community and tell them that you need to be brushing your hair, you need to be brushing your teeth, take good baths, and make sure your clothes are clean, you put on some perfume for your wives. After all, your poor wife has to look at you all day, all of her lifetime, and so inshallah she'll be happier if she has a pleasing sight. This is actually something very highly emphasized. Now, of course, this is emphasized for women too. However, I think generally speaking, women get it, that their husbands like them to look nice at home, and maybe women in general have an inclination towards fixing themselves up and so forth. Some men do too. I'm not saying they don't, but there is a particular emphasis for men doing this at the home, in the home. So this idea that men should take the initiative to look pleasant and have good grooming for their wives is something mentioned in our narrations, along with the modesty that men should have as well. And of course, the concept of modesty is part of the elevation of the human being in general, which is something we do see in the example of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, that they showed us truly what it means to be higher than the angels in the way in which we live. Because we as human beings, as is related, we can either be lower than the animals or higher than the angels. And of course, we see animals do not have modesty of any kind, not in conduct, not before the malaika, not before Allah Ta'ala, not before themselves. But of course, the higher we go, then inshallah, the more this trait would be inculcated. So these are just a few characteristics of ideals for what it means to be a man, and a few ideals for women as well, as shown in the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. They're ideals we can consider in our own selves or in our own families. Especially if someone is raising children, it's good to keep these ideals in mind, to think, what things do I want to teach my son about being an ideal man in the Islamic model, or what things do I wish to teach my daughter as well. Inshallah, we can all continue to look more at the example of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, to ponder on this age-old question of what makes a truly perfect man or a perfect woman. What characteristics are these? وآخر دعوانا عن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.